hounds, chase ghosts, come sleep, watch out, demons are coming, run, sleep, hide, spirits, ghosts, hide, demons, hounds, ghosts, demons are coming, spirits, ghosts.
Welcome home, my little hellhounds. I have just a quick update for you all. I have had an idea of doing a live paranormal investigations and interviewing real paranormal investigators, but I need your help to fund it. So I have set up a Patreon for you guys to donate if you so wish. I will put exclusive content on there as well for my patrons. It only costs $4. I hope to see you all there as well. Anyways, tonight we have 4 scary stories to sink our hellish teeth into. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe and like the video, as this really helps the channel. If you have any scary stories you want narrated on the channel, then submit them to Reddit r/homeofscares. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter at homeofscares. Now, let's get right into it. My guardian creature saved me from being abducted. Posted by MPZ 1968. Sometimes in life, things happen that just can't be explained. Like when you're driving at night and a pair of headlights appears in your rear view mirror out of nowhere, coming up on you fast. The car then goes to pass you, but nothing does. Like hearing a baby cry when you're home alone and you don't have any kids. Like that remote control that you lost 2 months ago suddenly appears on the end table where it wasn't there before. Like when you... Never mind, you get the point. Now, what I'm about to tell you is one of those unexplained happenings. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Natasha. I'm a 19-year-old female college student, a freshman to be exact, at a small university in Delaware, majoring in culinary arts. I have big dreams of being a chef and owning my own restaurant. I work part-time at Chelsea's. I've been there about 6 months now. It's a small family-owned restaurant located in a strip mall near my dorm. I'm one of the cooks. I have classes in the morning and I work there in the evenings, 3 to 4 times a week. Chelsea's is about 1.5 miles from my dorm, so I choose to walk to work. Well, not really choose, I kind of have to, since I don't have a car. Make a left as you're leaving my dorm. Make a left at the end of the building. Walk about 50 yards to the entrance of the campus. Cross the highway. Make another left. Walk about 1 mile or so past the patch of trees and the empty dirt field. then the malls on the right. Anyway, enough about me. Back to the story. Now this happened about 3 months ago, and I still can't get it out of my mind. It was early December. It had snowed the night before, so there was a good bit of snow everywhere except the roads. The DOT, that's Department of Transportation, in case you didn't know. They had salted and ploughed the roads earlier, so they were pretty clear. I got dressed, got bundled up in my new winter jacket, put my hat, gloves and scarf on, as well as my boots, and made the 1.5-mile trek through the snow to Chelsea's. I could have got a ride from my roommate Stacey. She studies criminal justice and hopes one day to be a cop. Or I could have just taken the bus, but I like the exercise and the cold don't really bother me. Anyway, work went on like usual. Nothing really exciting happened. Then about 10 minutes before closing, which is 10 o'clock, we got a bus. Now anyone that works in the food industry, being fast food or restaurant style, knows that getting a bus 10 minutes before closing time means you're not getting out of there anytime soon. Anyway, about an hour and a half later, everyone on the bus was seated and served, then got back on the bus and left. It was 11:30 at this point. We did our usual clean-up, which took about 45 minutes, and the entire closing staff left the restaurant at about 12:15. I didn't have any classes the next morning, so I really didn't mind. Plus the extra 2 hours would look good on my paycheck. Anyway, Dave, the manager, offered to give me a ride home, but as I said earlier, I like the exercise, so I declined and began to walk home. Everyone else drove out of the parking lot and headed their own way. I took the same route home as I always take, walking with the flow of traffic as Delaware law says you must do. The moon was full that night, so there was plenty of light for me to see. Usually there are street lamps lighting the way, but they shut off at midnight to save energy, or something like that, I don't know. Anyway, with it being so late, there were practically no cars on the road, just a few. About halfway through passing the empty dirt field, which was now covered in snow, a beige-coloured minivan slowed down and pulled over on the side of the road about 50 feet in front of me. I saw the reverse lights come on and watched the van slowly creep back to where I was standing, stopped about 10 feet in front of me. I was starting to freak out. I had never walked home this late before. No one ever stopped before. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Suddenly, the passenger side door opened, and a very small man, maybe 5 feet nothing, stepped out of the van. He had on a pair of blue jeans, a white t-shirt, work boots, and an old beaten baseball cap. His eyes were small and squinty. He had one of those 70s porn star mustaches. Now, mind you, it's December, freezing outside, snow on the ground, and this guy's standing there in a t-shirt. Anyway, hey there, little lady, you need a lift? We'll take you anywhere you'd like, he said in a very bad impression of a southern accent. No, I'm good, I said nervously. Just going for a little walk to let off some steam. What's bothering you, girl? He said in that same pathetic accent as he stepped toward me, opening the sliding door of the van. Get in, and let's talk about it. Me and my buddy are very good listeners, he said. I wanted to run, but I knew he would catch me. I wanted to scream, but I knew no one would hear me, so I just stood there. No, really, I'm okay, I said more nervously, my voice cracking as I did. But, thanks for stopping though. He just stood there. After a few seconds, his eyes grew wide, his top lip curled up, and angry consumed his face as he quickly stepped toward me and yelled through gritted teeth, I am not gonna, as he started to say, stopped, and then threw himself back first against the sliding door of the van. What the hell is, what is that? He said in a trembling voice and pointed toward the field. I thought it might be a trick, so I just stood there. Suddenly, I began to hear a low, guttural growl coming from the right of me. I turned my head slowly to see this creature, I don't know what else to call it, standing on all fours about 20 feet away. It wasn't a dog. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't anything that I'd ever seen before. As the full moon shined down on the snow-covered field, I could easily see this creature. It was about the size of a buffalo, its long grey fur blowing in the cold air. Its head resembled that of a wolf, with fire-engine red eyes, a long pointy snout, and two long horns protruding from either side of its head. Its legs were huge, with paws, or better yet, claws that would rival that of a prehistoric dinosaur. It reared back on its hind legs and let out this blood-curdling screech as two absolutely humongous bat-like wings spread out from its back. Now this is just one of the things I cannot explain about that night. I was completely calm. I wasn't scared. I wasn't terrified. Nothing. It was like I was at peace as this hellish creature stood less than spitting distance away from me. Anyway, the creature then dropped back down on all fours and began to walk quickly toward the road and the van. Its mouth opened to reveal another mouth, which opened to reveal hundreds of tiny, little razor-like teeth. Go, go, I heard a deep gravelly voice say, as I turned my head to see the guy jump into the van and shut the door. The van sped off quickly after that. I calmly turned my head to look at this beautiful, monstrous, life-saving creature, and it was gone, vanished into thin air. That's another thing I can't explain. I quickly ran home in the snow, which is not easy to do. I got to my room and turned every light on that I could find. Somehow, Stacy stayed asleep. Anyway, I made a pot of coffee, drank it, and stayed up all night until morning came. When Stacy woke up, I told her what happened. She didn't believe me. So to prove it, we get in Stacey's car and drove back to the spot in the field where the creature was. Sure enough, there were huge claw imprints on the snow, several of them. I took a picture on my phone of one of the imprints. I use it as my wallpaper for my lock screen. I still live in the dorm. I still work at Chelsea's. And yes, I still walk to work and walk home. But from that night on, I always stop about halfway through the field and say thank you to my guardian creature. I didn't leave an open house for nearly 15 years. Posted by MTP921. Of the hundreds of open house signs I passed by, one really caught my eye. The realtor of the homeowner really went out of their way and rented thousands of dollars worth of displays to grab your attention, which included a bunch of mannequins that were dressed up in a stormtrooper gear, Disney princesses and inflatable dinosaurs. I pass by this house every day to and from work, so on my way home from work I decided, why not, I'll check out the house. As I walked into the house, the lone guy laughed and said, "Surprise, you're the first person to actually come into the house, so you're the winner." I said, "Wow, thanks, I guess." The man was very hospitable and offered to take my jacket. He was in his early 70s, but he had great skin and looked like William Shatner. The house wasn't very big. It was just a one-story ranch-style home. He showed me the one bedroom and the living room, dining room, bathroom and the kitchen. I told him the house felt warm and cozy. He said, "You know, I'll give you a unique offer since you're the big winner. You can stay for the night rent-free and no strings attached, and I'll be your butler, where I'll be at your every beck and call." I was completely taken off guard. I really only expected to peek into the house and leave. The man was waiting for my response. I thought to myself, "You're 32, recently divorced, without any kids. So as odd as this offer is, why not?" So I replied, "Sure, why not?" The man responded, "Fantastic. Why don't you go to the bedroom and relax?" The bedroom was really soothing. The walls were painted a cotton candy tone, and the ceiling had a hand-painted mural of the solar system. I instantly fell in love with the room, and it took me no time to feel comfortable. The man said, "Call me Red, and I'll get you anything you want. How about a drink? I have just anything you can imagine." I responded, "I don't know." Red responds, "How about a martini?" I said, "That'll be great, thank you." Red came back in 2 minutes later with the martini. I did nothing more than lay down in the bed and sip on the martini. Every 20 minutes, Red stopped in and asked me if I wanted anything, and if everything was okay. I really felt like I was in heaven. I didn't need the TV on or the radio. The room just felt so warm and comforting. Red came in once I finished the martini and said, "What can I get you for dinner?" I was stunned by the offer, and I didn't know what to say. Red said, "How about some linguine in white sauce with shrimp?" I said, "Yeah, that sounds really good." Red replies, "Fantastic. Just give me a few minutes." I thought to myself, I wish my ex-husband treated me this way. I did nothing more than just lay there as Red prepared dinner for me. This gave me time to think about when I physically returned from Iraq, but mentally I was never the same. I had the grotesque job of processing dead Americans every day for 4 years. Nobody considered me a combat veteran, but I was living in the desert and seeing mangled corpses every day. All the men, including my superiors, would hit on me. When I got back home, I married a guy I knew in high school. My ex-husband complained that I was always distant and was emotionally unavailable pretty much at all times. About 15 minutes later, Red brought in a tray with the pasta and some wine. I was just taken aback by everything. I felt so relaxed as I ate the meal. Red checked on me every 10 minutes to make sure I was okay. After I finished, Red took my plate away and said, "Here, take this robe and get changed. You can stay here as long as you like." I really didn't know what to say. Red had this really trusting quality that I didn't feel threatened, so I said, "Okay." I took the robe and got changed in the bathroom that was accessible through the bedroom without having to leave the bedroom. I put the robe on and laid down in the bed. Red had pulled the sheets and blanket out for me. I laid down in the bed and Red tucked me in. He didn't try any funny business or anything else. He told me he would check on me every 2 hours, and then he shut the light off. The bed was the most comfortable bed I have ever slept in. I'm not the most trusting person, so I'm just amazed that I'm in this bed in an unknown guy's house that I just met a few hours ago. But that didn't matter right now, because I was tired and I was going to bed. So I shut my eyes and fell asleep. The next morning I woke in a good mood. Typically I'm irritable and I question why I'm awake, but this morning I feel good. Red knew that I was awake and he gave me a warming blanket to put under my back. Then he offered me a pedicure, which I accepted. Today is Friday and I was supposed to be in work an hour ago, but there was no way I was going to pass up this opportunity, so I called off work. Red finished my pedicure, then he gave me a facial with the cut cucumbers around my eyes and everything. I felt the closest to heaven that I have ever felt. This went on for days and days, where Red's only purpose in life was to serve me. I never questioned his motives. I was just living the good life. I even quit my job. I figured a job will always be there, but having someone cater to my every need, day and night for free, is unheard of. I lost track of what day it was, because it really didn't matter. I didn't care about birthdays, Christmas, Thanksgivings. Those days didn't mean anything to me anymore. I was just for the here and now. Red spent each and every day on the couch in the living room. He didn't watch TV or read magazines. He just sat on the couch. His only purpose was to serve me. It is like getting a check from the government for $1,000 a week. You don't want to ask why. because the check might stop coming. Living in this bedroom really has fixed a lot of problems I was having prior to coming to the open house, where I no longer binge eat. I don't obsess over trivial things, and I've actually lost weight, even though I'm nearly completely sedentary. My memories of being in Iraq are even becoming a distant memory. I've had to be in this bed for years now, maybe 5, maybe 10, perhaps even 15 years. I've had so many facials that I look younger now than when I first came into the house. I just don't want it to end. I feel like I've been on a cruise that I love so much, but I never have to worry when the cruise will end. Then I woke up one morning and Red didn't come in and ask me what I wanted for breakfast. I waited and waited and waited. I felt like the worst had happened, and I begrudgingly went out into the living room to figure out what was going on with Red. Coming out of the bedroom was such an awful feeling. I hadn't left the room for years and years, and I felt like I went from being in a 5-star hotel to being in an abandoned car just by leaving the bedroom. I didn't see Red, but there was a typed out manuscript on the table. I picked up the manuscript and I brought it into the bedroom to read. The title of the manuscript was Isolation. In the manuscript, Red explains that he had a meltdown when he returned from Vietnam in the 1960s. Before the war, he wouldn't have hurt an ant, but when he got drafted when he was 18 years old, and he was thrusted into an unfamiliar jungle, his platoon was wiped out by a 10-day non-stop offensive by the enemy. He had ran out of ammo and resorted to stabbing their enemy with his knife. Red was the last one alive, so he guessed the Americans won that battle, but he lost his soul in that jungle. When he returned back to the States, there was no help for him to deal with his mental demons. He had robbed stores and got into a ton of fist fights with innocent people. He was sentenced to prison for 20 years for crippling someone. He was unfit for the general population in prison, so they put him in solitary confinement. The gist of his manuscript was, why wasn't he just put into a bedroom, like I was, to heal mentally? He was unfit to function in society after the war from what he experienced, so why wasn't he just placed in a bedroom to help recover? I felt really sad for Red after I read his manuscript. I was just his experiment to show that people can live isolated and be happy and not be a danger to society. Serving me was comforting to him, and he could hang out on the couch most of the day without having to deal with unnecessary stimulus. Red's role of serving someone else would be stage 2 of the veteran's mental healing, where it was almost a state of penance. The only problem I was having is that the world no longer had anything to offer me. I had no motivation to leave the house. The last page of the manuscript, Red had left a phone number for an outreach program for veterans who have recently returned from combat in the Middle East, and he had taped a credit card to the manuscript for expenses. I was ready to assume the role of Red for the next veteran who walked through the door. Only the chosen were allowed to live in my town. Posted by MTP6921. Both of my parents had graduated college, where my father had gone on to be a psychiatrist and my mother was an accomplished author. However, by their mid-30s, they knew whatever they did in life, they were doing nothing more than running from their childhood trauma, whether if it was from being bullied unmercifully or dealing with emotionally abusive parents. So my parents, who were always wanting to initiate change, both wanted to start a unique community that was based on love and respect for everyone, and that would be the community's number one goal above anything else. The one thing that Michigan has are towns that have essentially zero jobs besides the modern day equivalent of the dollar store. So both of my parents petitioned wealthy philanthropists essentially start a town where nothing was more important than one's emotional health in order to create a happier society. The wealthy anthropologists were willing to give money to my parents' cause because they considered it a living experiment, and most of the philanthropists identified through their own personal experiences unnecessary behaviours taught by schools and people's home life. So my parents came across an old manufacturing town not far from Detroit and approached each homeowner with a very generous offer to buy their individual homes. My parents wouldn't pay anyone or sign the individual homeowner's contract until every single homeowner agreed to sell their houses and leave the town. Eventually, every homeowner agreed to leave. The 200 homes that stretched about 1 mile in diameter were basically completely vacant. My parents petitioned the local zoning offices to re-establish the town as a private community, and they rerouted the roads so outside traffic wouldn't come through the town. Then my parents disbanded the local government. Every single piece of local history was destroyed. The town was renamed My Town. The school was completely stripped down to nothing. All of the trophies and photos of individual past accomplishments my parents took great joy in destroying. My parents went through every single of the 200 homes to make sure there were no mementos left behind. Then they made sure every wall inside the homes was painted white, and to ensure that there weren't any egos left over from the previous homeowners. My parents had put out a ton of advertisements with headlines like, "Are you tired of running from your past?" or "What if your school wasn't a horror movie?" Then the advertisement would explain the intent of the new My Town, and everyone had to be 100% invested to the town's philosophy. My parents had gotten thousands of applicants, which they had selected 200 families. They made sure to include people who had trades like plumbers and welders to keep the town self-sufficient. The old monastery would be turned into a home for psychological counsellors who would be the backbone of the community. Instead of a school having one counsellor for 100 kids, my town would have a counsellor for every 5 kids. The counsellor's role would be to ascertain what negative interactions or feelings the kids were experiencing, with the hopes of confronting any bullying and zeroing in on any issues at home. My parents had developed a strict code of conduct on how people in the community are to behave. Nobody owned their homes, so if the rules weren't followed, then they would be forced to leave. Every negative behaviour was forbidden, to include anger, jealousy, manipulation, greed, and so on and so on. Things like spiritualism weren't forbidden, but the community's rules always came first. The town had filled all of its houses, and school started in September. The curriculum had its typical subjects like math and science, but emotional and mental health were at its core. Everyone learned together, and there were no smart kids and no dumb kids. Everyone ate lunch at their desks and socialised in class as a whole. There were no popular kids or cool kids. The mindset of being competitive was done away with and replaced with the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So gym class was solely meant for cardiovascular health, and not who's the most physically or athletically gifted. All of these same philosophies were to be followed by parents as well. My parents were the overseers of the town, and they would get reports from the counsellors and act on any corrective actions that needed to be done. A lot of things in my town were allowed, like drinking, as long as the town's core values were being followed. By December of the first year, 5 out of the 200 families were being closely monitored for behaviours that weren't conducive to the betterment of the community. My parents realised that just about everyone had brought in their own baggage from their previous life, and as long as they were making a conscious effort to fix their behaviours, then my parents would work with the problem families. By the 4th month, my parents knew 2 of the families weren't good fits for the community. The bad fits just couldn't keep their suggestions to themselves and had to come up with ways on how things could be done better. My parents weren't against suggestions, but not when they were done in a way to promote one's self-ego, like because of me, or I fixed the problem we were having. For the families who were told to leave, they had to leave the next day, and if they did, then they would receive a $5,000 relocation check to help them with their moving. My parents didn't fill the vacant homes with new families because they just wanted to perfect what they already had in place. As the weeks went on, expectations grew higher and higher from my parents. The kids were the best way to uncover abhorrent behaviours from their parents and in their homes. For example, during the daily meetings with a counsellor, a student might say, "When my dad comes home from work, he walks aggressively throughout the house." My parents would then confront their father, and the father would say, "My kid doesn't know what I had to deal with in work that day." My parents would then try to correct the father and explain that his child may have been experiencing some of the same anxiety in school as you did at work, but transferring your aggressiveness onto others isn't the solution. Ultimately, his father wasn't able to identify his own negative behaviours, and him and his family had to leave. The evictions were now occurring about once a week. Another common issue was when a counsellor would discover a kid was being controlled at home by their mother in a manner that the mother's way was the only right way, and approval could only be sought by obeying the mother. This accounted for the largest amount of dismissals or evictions from my town. Well over a year had passed and my town was down to only 50 families. My parents never wavered on enforcing their policies. My parents would rather have 0 families than have a community that was no different from other outside communities. More weeks had passed and my town was down to just 10 families. My parents still had hope, but were realistic that my town would probably be empty sooner rather than later. Then one afternoon the FBI came to meet with my parents. They received a tip that the counsellors were weeding out and grooming kids so the counsellors could abuse them. That's when my parents immediately pulled the plug on my town, knowing that their vision of a community that fostered emotional health would never work because the adults brought their own baggage into my town that could never be fixed. Michigan's governor was made aware of a vacant town with a vacant school, so he turned my town into Hope Town, where applicants were selected from parolees to kids who got expelled from their schools. The motto had changed from being a town fostering emotional health to survival of the fittest. My family's hot dogs with pot business, posted by MTP6921. By the end of 2004, my parents were tired of random people coming over our house to buy marijuana. It was still very illegal, and the amount they were selling would put them away for a long time. My parents' main concern were the police and not getting robbed. They would explain to me that most pot users were calm, mellow people, just looking for a mental escape. My dad had his own 18-wheeler truck, and once a month he would transport leg prosthetics from a reputable Mexican prosthetic manufacturer in La Cruz, Mexico, to Pennsylvania. My dad had a secret compartment in his truck where he built a fake wall, which gave my dad about 100 square feet to fit in as much pot as possible. My dad would first go to Nuevo Laredo, where he would pick up the pot, and then he would go to pick up the prosthetics. The prosthetic company didn't know enough about 18-wheelers to realise that there was a fake wall up, and the remaining space was more than enough anyways. The border agents never gave my dad a hard time because the sergeant in charge at the border had a prosthetic leg and was familiar with the company and the manufactured prosthetics. My parents were true business people who brought in a few $100,000 every month, but no one would ever know it based on the small ranch that we owned. In the summer of 2004, my parents had decided to open up a fast food restaurant with their main objective being to sell pot. It would be just a small rinky-dink hot dog, french fries and soda fast food restaurant, nothing difficult to make to distract us from our real cash crop. We actually used an abandoned White Castles that was about 5 times too big for our hot dog establishment needed to be. We even had a brand new local hot dog manufacturer basically only charge us 10 cents a hot dog for exclusive usage rights. My parents told me that they put in about $150,000 into the place and called it the hot dog joint. My mom, dad and I had to pass a safe serve course in order to handle food, and my hours were limited since I was only 15. We put up a real uninviting sign outside our restaurant and advertised to no one but our local pot users. The size of the French fries order indicated if they wanted a dime bag, half an ounce, or an ounce, and our pot customers had to ask for a hot dog with marinara sauce to indicate the real reason why they were ordering food. The first couple of weeks, everything was going to plan. We were only open from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. and sometimes on the weekends. My mum mostly made the hot dogs and french fries, where I would take the order and my dad would collect the money and hand the customer the food and the pot. Then something unexpected and unwanted happened. The potheads really liked our hot dogs and told all their non-pothead friends about how good our hot dogs tasted. We never put marinara sauce as a topping on our menu, and luckily the potheads didn't tell anyone about that special topping. Things just got absolutely insane. Our drive-through line was like a quarter-mile long. A lot of people would comment that our hot dogs were 10 times better than the Nathan hot dogs at Coney Island. We couldn't even switch to an inferior hot dog because we had signed a 2-year contract with Bix Beef. Eventually, 1 out of 20 customers were at our restaurant to actually buy pot. We had to extend our hours in order to serve our pot clientele because some of them wouldn't get served because the line was so long. We were now open to 7 p.m. and after work the 3 of us brainstormed to come up with a solution. Ultimately, we decided to raise our hot dog prices from $2 to $10 a hot dog. We figured this would deter people from coming. However, it almost had the opposite effect. There was so much media buzz about our place that people were coming from far away just to try the hot dogs. Some people even commented that it was like going to the real famous pizzerias in New York, where you need a reservation 6 months in advance, and people were willing to spend $70 for a plain pizza pie. Basically threw the food at the customers and gave them a real bad attitude as well, which the media said was part of the local flair, which added to the experience. We were still making mere pennies from the hot dogs compared to the pot. We were charging $150 an ounce for pot and $10 for a hot dog. We were even hoping that Big's Beef would sell their hot dogs at grocery stores, which they refused to do because they were making so much money off of merchandising and they didn't want anything damaging their image. We were making our pot money, but we're literally working 100 times harder than necessary. We thought about hiring additional people and we were still reluctant to do so because of the pot. Eventually we had no choice, so we hired 3 16-year-old girls. We didn't want to risk hiring undercover cops, and we wanted employees who were a little naive to what was going on. Paula, Kerry and Sasha were all hired within a week. They were well needed support and they mostly helped my mother with the food and with the cleaning. The 3 16-year-olds were actually working out great because they were too nervous to actually realise what was going on, and they were hard workers. Typically my mother would put the hot dogs and fries on the warming counter and the girls would assemble the order and hand it to my father. My mother would personally hand the marinara hot dogs to my father. We had a great system in place, and of course it was only a matter of time before something else happened. Apparently a non-pot user heard about the marinara hot dog and wanted to try it. So I asked the customer what size fries he wanted, and he said medium. So my dad added a half an ounce of pot in the customer's bag and charged him $75. The amount of money we charged was our red flag to the customer to question why is a hot dog and fries $75, and a clue to us as to why they were questioning the order. But this customer just paid and didn't question the price. And of course the customer was a cop. So when he saw the pot in his bag, my dad and I saw his reaction and we knew something went horribly wrong. The customer raised his voice and identified himself as a cop. He then said he was coming inside. So I acted fast and threw all of our pot into Kerry's school bag that she brought into the restaurant. The cop searched our restaurant and found nearly a half a pound of pot in her bag, which would have been much more if it was earlier in the day. My parents put the best performance of their life on, knowing the £100 at our house would mean serious jail time. My mother said, "Kerry, how could you? We put so much trust in you." The poor girl, who looked like she'd never seen an R-rated movie in her life, was crying hysterically. The cop took the drugs and apparently he knew Kerry's aunt, so he just yelled at her and left with the half a pound of pot. He may have been a corrupt cop, but we were just happy that we didn't get arrested with our house searched. Kerry looked like someone had just killed her whole family, and my parents knew they needed to make the situation right. My parents told Kerry, in exchange for keeping her mouth shut, we would pay her an extra $100 an hour, which she agreed. The 2 other girls were pretty much in the dark and thought Kerry did something bad that involved drugs. $100 an hour was just a small drop in the bucket. The following days everything was returning back to normal. Kerry had lost some of her innocence with being implicated with the drugs, but was happy to be making $100 an hour. Once again, things made a horrible change for the worst. The cop who turned out to be crooked was suspicious of the situation and had talked to Kerry privately. The cop, after meeting with Kerry, went to our house and found the £100 of pot in our house, where he took pictures of everything. My parents knew they would get a minimum sentence of 7 years, and I would be placed in foster care or juvenile detention centre, depending on the judge. So now, Officer Dan gave us 2 options. 1, go to jail, or 2, we work for him now, and the drug money goes to Officer Dan and a smaller amount to Kerry. Me, my dad and mum would keep the actual restaurant money, but none of the pot money. I would no longer take customers' orders, and now Kerry would do that, where she would keep track of the amount of drug money that was coming in. My father would still add the pot and collect the money, but now, at the end of the day, he would wire the money to Officer Dan. We now make about $200 a year selling hot dogs, and Officer Dan makes about $3 million, and Kerry about $500,000 a year that she puts into a bank's safety deposit box, which her parents have no idea. My dad really hates taking trips to Mexico now, but at least we still have our saved up drug money from our past dealings. And that's it for tonight, my little hellhounds. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video, and check out Patreon. If you have any scary stories, then submit them to Reddit r/homeofscares, and follow me on Twitter at homeofscares. Now, good night, my little hellhounds.